I read 64 books in 2023, and so in 2024 I want to try to read 75. Because I'm just nowhere near organised enough to TBR my whole year, I'm gonna include 30 books in this list to leave room for a lot of random books that I'm gonna decide to pick up with just no real rhyme or reason, because that is how my reading goes. TBRs are pointless for me. Sorry. Keep watching though, like this one will be pointful. And I hope that the flexibility that I'm giving myself will nurture success. Okay, for your information, I have already read, sorry that sounded mean. For your information, I have already read The Vanishing Half, The Vegetarian, Good Material, Babel, French Braid, Poor Things, Sorrow and Bliss, 7 Days in June, Year of Rest and Relaxation, Daisy Jones and the Six, Stay True, A Love Song for Rickie Wilde, Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, and Book Lovers. I am currently reading My Dark Vanessa. I'm reading this on Kindle and I'm finding it pretty difficult, but kind of like how people talk about car crashes, like you cannot look away. It's about a schoolgirl. They have a romantic relationship. I'm describing it in this way because that's a huge part of the book, is like she is grappling with the fact that it was abuse and she's kind of looking back on it and still doesn't accept many parts of it, and it's very interesting, a very interesting read, but it's detailed and so it is also quite a difficult read. Having said that, I've been lying on the sofa all evening reading it, unable to stop, so take from that what you will. My next book that I am currently reading is Memorial by Brian Washington. It's about a couple, Benson and Mike. Mike is Japanese American and his Japanese mother has come to stay with them, but Mike, before she even arrived, went back to Japan to visit his ill father, who he hasn't seen in absolutely ages. So already you can feel that it's a complicated one. So Benson is just hanging out with Mike's mother that he doesn't know at all. And they also, Benson and Mike, don't seem to love each other. So it's very odd. They kind of are falling out of love, don't seem to even like each other that much. But I'm enjoying the ride so far. Happy Place. I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry literally days ago and I loved it. It was the first romance that I felt really hit that rom-com feeling, rom-com like film feeling that I've been looking for, that I just haven't been able to find in romances. I typically find them quite cringe, but Emily Henry is the one for me, and I've reserved Happy Place at my local library. Another reservation that I'm excited to collect is Big Swiss. I have been wanting to read this for a while because it seems very juicy and it's also just been quite relentlessly recommended all over the internet. It seems like the kind of book I'd like. It's about someone called Greta who transcribes therapy sessions for her sex coach boss, and she falls in love with one of the clients, and then she meets that client outside of the session, and I think they then start getting together. Mixed reviews I've seen, but I hope it lives up to expectation because it sounds so interesting, doesn't it? A very fun premise. I'm currently also listening to The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This was published in 2000 and I was recommended this actually in a comment on one of my videos where because I've read The Handmaid's Tale, it's one of my favourite books of all time, and then I read another Margaret Atwood and I then read another, and I just, the other books I've read since just haven't quite hit in the way I expected them to. I read Elias Grace, which I did enjoy. But anyway, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a mess. I have a complicated relationship with Margaret. And I was told that if I wanted to really work out whether I liked her or not, I should read The Blind Assassin. So I'm doing that. I haven't read much of it. I'm a bit confused, to be honest. It's one of those story within a story type books. But as per usual, Margaret, even though it's a little confusing, is not letting me down with the quotes and the insights, and yeah, it's just that, like, she just oozes smartness. It's about a risky affair in the turbulent 30s between a wealthy young woman and a man on the run. During their secret meetings in rented rooms, the lovers concoct a pulp fantasy set on planet Zychron. So even that, which I got from Google, I now recognise it in some of the reading I've done already, but Like, that's concerning. I should understand that premise already. I probably would have been able to describe that and get it pretty accurately if you put a gun to my head, but it's concerning that it would take that much. Anyway, high hopes, maybe foolishly, but there we are. The Stand is another one that I need to collect from the library. I think someone's borrowed it and it's over 1,000 pages long, so it's taking a while for that anonymous other person who's borrowed it to give it back to the library. How many times can I say library? I like to get out of my comfort zone, and I think this book is going to absolutely just hurl me out of my comfort zone, throw me off the brink, and I will fall deeper and deeper into a very uncomfortable abyss. Hopefully I'll land on my feet at the bottom, but it's a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy by Stephen King. I've never read a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy. I'm actually quite a scared person. That's why I've avoided this genre. I don't like to feel afraid. I like to feel other things, but fear just isn't one that I enjoy. So I'm just putting my trust in Stephen King. I actually haven't read any Stephen King before, which I plan to do more of this year, as you'll see. If anyone's read The Stand, let me know. I actually don't see much about it. It might just be because it's so long that, like, understandably, who has the time for that, you know? Okay, on to my physical TBR. I don't want to turn away from the camera because I feel like my hair's really greasy. Even if I can just edit it out, the damage will be done if I see the back of my hair. First up, we've got Wilde Swans, a book I found at my family home. It's a true story, actually, about 3 generations of Chinese women, and it's meant to be gripping and kind of historically relevant, but also very intimate at the same time, and just unusual and extraordinary, and it's just all of the big words. So I'm a little afraid. I definitely feel like I need to treat this read with the respect it deserves. Next up, we have The Catcher in the Rye. I do actually think I've read it before, but so long ago that it's worth a reread. It's a classic. It's about a 16-year-old boy who has just dropped out or been kicked out of school, and he arrives in New York City, and it follows his 2 days there. And it's a very popular coming of age tale, and especially I think for its time it's meant to be really powerful, and it's not that long, and from what I remember it was also quite accessible for a classic. So oh no, sorry. Remains of the Day. This is from the point of view of a butler who has spent his time working and living at Darlington Hall, a stately home near Oxford. He basically just reminisces about all the things that happened between 1920 and 1930, like that kind of era. That's all I know. A Fine Balance. This is about 4 people living in India in the 1970s, and their lives become meshed and woven in on each other. I attempted to read this a few years ago when it first came into my possession, but I couldn't get into it. I think it is quite heavy and a little bit tricky to read, or at least that's what I remember at the time. But at the time I was a lot worse at reading. Like, I just didn't have as much of an attention span, and I didn't prioritize it as a hobby. So I'm really hoping that returning to it, I'll get a lot more out of it. And yeah, I can barely remember anything that happened. So it's moments like these when you're sort of grateful for having a sieve brain, because spoilers don't really exist if you can't remember them ever. The God of Small Things. Again, I think I started it and couldn't continue it. It's about fraternal twins. 7-year-old twins are growing up amidst vats of banana jam, mountains of peppercorns, and scenes of political turbulence in Kerala. When their beautiful young cousin Sophie arrives, their world is shaken irrevocably. I hope to have reason to use the word irrevocably one day, because I see it a lot and it just has a gravitas about it, and I don't think anything's ever qualified. Any scenario is ever qualified for use of that word. And the whole like God of Small Things thing is meant to refer to how small things can affect you for the rest of your life. That's what the critics say anyway. Shall I angle you down so you can actually see these books better? Okay, so either, I don't actually like this angle, like for my head, I think it's weird. Either Or by L.F. Boutman is the sequel to The Idiot by L.F. Boutman. The Idiot is about Selin, a Harvard University freshman. I don't know how the American like years work, but she's just arrived at Harvard University, and then she spends her summer in Hungary and she kind of falls in love, but nothing really happens. And nothing really happens is actually quite a good way to summarize the book. It's kind of long, but it's very meandering. It's very kind of Lost gal about the arrogance of youth, but also the confidence of youth and the creativity, and like there's a degree of self-awareness, and I just really enjoyed it. So I think Selin has returned to Harvard for her sophomore year. Oh, and it's also based in 1996, which is useful because it means there's no texting. So a lot of things happen over email or don't happen at all, and there's more room for like big gaps in communication, and there wasn't doom scrolling in 1996, so you have to spend your time philosophizing and thinking about your life and your actions, I guess. On writing, I plan to read, as I said. Haven't read any Stephen King yet, so maybe I should read Stephen King before reading on writing, but this is a memoir of the craft, as he said right there actually. So he talks about, like, gives advice for writing, but also kind of weaves in, I think, a bit about his life, what writing is to him, and how he's gone and done it, you know, because he has written a lot of books. It's almost like I've had to put effort into not reading any at this point. The Goldfinch, I got this as part of a bundle deal because I was getting some jeans on Vinted, and the seller also had the Goldfinch, and when it arrived I kind of regretted it because I'm very selective about what books I own and have in my flat because I have nowhere to put it in my rental flat in London. Donatar also wrote The Secret History, which I did really enjoy. I know a lot of people didn't, and it's having that kind of wave of like, guys, it's overhyped, but it's kind of the classic dark academia example that people give. So I was really excited to read The Goldfinch, but I've been reading that loads of people complain that it needs an edit and that it's way too long, and it's exactly what happens when a writer writes a hit and then editors are too afraid to force them to cut things down, and no. But I think I need to just block out the haters, give it a go, see how I find it. 13-year-old Fyodor Decker and the dramatic changes his life undergoes after he survives a terrorist attack at the Met. It kills his mother and results in him coming into possession of the Goldfinch painting. So it's kind of an interesting premise. Like, why does it matter that you have the Goldfinch painting? The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I really loved Crime and Punishment. I read it last year. It was a really big deal. I haven't really read much Russian literature. I loved it so much it made me read Anna Karenina quite soon after. And it's a murder mystery courtroom drama about three brothers and their dad. It definitely seems to have Crime and Punishment energy. I've seen a lot of people describe this as their favorite Dostoevsky, and I obviously am not knowledgeable about these things, but I feel like I don't see many people talk about this book. The Last Act of Love is a memoir, a girl, now a woman, whose brother, after being in an accident, is then in a coma for like a decade, maybe even longer. And it's about her kind of grief and endurance and just living through that. Okay, finally, and then I'm relocating because my legs are going numb. Notes from the Underground. The question that is being asked is, can you be too conscious? It's about a man who is never named. It's kind of part of the mystery, you know, it's all very relevant, and I'm sure people have analysed it a million times over. This nameless man is basically too conscious, too self-critical, and it's not a good thing, I think, is the ultimate message, but sounds a bit philosophical and smart. So I'm gonna have to make sure my brain is firing on all cylinders when I read it. Okay, I'm gonna move locations now. Revive my legs, hopefully. This is now my non-physical TBR, so I'm gonna have to pop them up on the screen, which is sad for future Chloe. Another Country, a classic about race and sex and politics and passion and art. That's the list that I've been told by the internet. It's set in multiple locations, but predominantly Harlem. I couldn't really decipher many of the details. I get the impression that a lot happens. It's quite chaotic and layered, but all I know is it's a bit of a must read. The Rachel Incident, another that's been on the TBR for a little bit too long. I've seen this recommended for lost young woman in their 20s vibes. The book is described as chaotic and funny. It's set in Ireland. It's about someone called Rachel who's a student who works at a bookstore, and she meets a boy called James and she fancies him loads, and we go from there. Okay, beach read, and the people we meet on vacation are both Emily Henry. I have no idea what they're about, but after reading Book Lovers, I was like, I know who's gonna give me a good pick-me-up when I need it. So I just went on my TBR and added all the books that she's ever written, pretty much. I'm sure, like Book Lovers, they are sentimental, feel-good, cheesy, but not too cheesy rom-coms, probably. I don't know. You can Google it yourself. Pachinko, which now I say it out loud, this TBR is actually so long. Oh well. Pachinko is historical fiction about a Korean family who moved to Japan, and I have been relentlessly recommended this book. It's massive and it's complex, but it's also meant to be brilliant. War and Peace, I'm gonna be honest, like this is on the list because I need to read it. I need to read War and Peace, in part because I read Anna Karenina, I want a little challenge, I really liked Anna Karenina, but another part of me is keen to read it because I need to read War and Peace, you know, like I need to read it to feel like I can die happy and to feel like I can really like tell everyone how much of a nerd I am. It's based in 1812 and it's about Napoleon's invasion of Russia, except it's like, it doesn't seem to be actually about that. It's just set in that time, follows 3 characters, and there is love, there is suffering. Anna Karenina was incredible. I enjoyed it so much. Like, the books are long, but Tolstoy gets to the heart of what it means to be a person, and he also just writes quite compelling narratives. Like, I'm a bit intimidated, but I also trust that I won't get bored, which when you look at a big book like that, it's definitely a concern. One thing actually, if you have read War and Peace, let me know which translation you read and which you recommend, because that is something that I did not know before I entered the world of Russian literature. I mean, it makes sense because translation is like an art in itself, especially I've read Babel recently. Can't you tell? Our Wives Under the Sea. This is another that's definitely outside my comfort zone, but I've just seen it recommended in so many places that I simply must read. I also am pretty obsessed with the cover, but it's a horror. I don't think I've ever read a pure horror before. It's always been a bit more kind of dark academia or like dark fantasy. But yeah, it's a horror story about grief and love, and it's described as a woman's search for her wife, or she's trying to get her wife back from the bottom of the sea, and she thinks that she's got her wife back, but like all is not what it seems. I have no idea what's going on, and honestly I don't want to know, I just want to read it. A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, the book that he wrote after his wife died, and it's his reflections on grief and death and all that good stuff, and it's just cited as a kind of grief must read. I've been slowly getting through grief books over the past year, actually it hasn't been that long, but I've been getting into them, but as you can imagine they're just not the kind of books you read in quick succession. They're quite draining. Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is set after the American Civil War, and it's mostly about slavery and like the legacy that it's left. It follows one character initially when she is an enslaved person, and then after, and it's kind of about her and her family living in a house that's haunted. I think this is just regular fiction, but like I don't think it's fantasy or anything, but it is haunted. Come and Get It by Kylie Reid. This is another one that I didn't know anything about before filming this video. I read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid a few years ago, and when I saw that she was writing another book, I believe this came out in January, or this just came out like this week, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna read it. Her books are just quite easy reads, but with good amounts of depth. The final 3 books are Goodreads recommendations. Like, I just went into all the different Goodreads winners and nominations and things for 2023 and had a bit of a snoop. I think it can be pretty hit or miss, like a lot of these different like types of awards, but I have had some success in the past. We have The Collected Regrets of Clover. This is about a death doula who spends her whole life looking after others as they approach the end of their life, but she starts to kind of doubt how can she give herself a fulfilling life when she spent so much time dealing with others and their stuff. And the question she asks is, what's the point of giving someone a beautiful death if you can't give yourself a beautiful life? This just caught my eye because I love a little death book, but it also feels quite uplifting and quite sweet and just a slightly original angle. Wayward is a historical fiction. It starts with Kate, our protagonist, fleeing a traumatic relationship, and she goes to live in this cottage in the middle of nowhere, but the cottage is shrouded in mystery and she uncovers things. Finally, the 30th book on this list is Ninth House, which is about a Yale student who got there in quite mysterious circumstances, dropped out of high school, and then was the only survivor in a really mysterious unsolved crime. Gets to Yale, wants to start afresh, but all is not what it seems, and the weirdness goes from there. I think like that description, it's intriguing, but it's not enough to make me prioritize it on the TBR. And the thing that made me want to put it on here and like really has compelled me to read it is the fact that it won Best Fantasy in 2019, but then this year its sequel won Best Fantasy, which is pretty cool. And I was really intrigued by its sequel, but when I saw that it was a sequel, I was like, damn it, gotta read the first one first. Okay, anyway, that concludes my list. Thank you for your time, thank you for your patience. I hope you have a lovely week. Wish me luck with this TBR. Let me know if there are any other books I should be reading, because there's definitely room to put more stuff in here. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.